long. Not letting people into the waiting room yet, Pride.
Okay, Deacon.
Okay. So this session is an hour and 20 minutes long, and I'm just warning everybody about that in advance. The recording will be circulated on the group tomorrow, but I wanted to divide it into two sessions, but there's just too much amazing information on this call. Dr. Wucha has spent 6 years actually preparing this presentation, and we are very, very, very privileged to be the first people to see it. So without further ado, it's a long recording. I'm going to hand everything over to Pride. Pride, can you please start to share the presentation? And then at the end of it, Dr. Wucha will be available for questions. If people need to leave the call at 7:30, that's fine. You will still get your CME points, and we'll share the recording on the links tomorrow. So thank you, everybody. And I will hand over to, I've seen this presentation. It is nothing short of outstanding and mind-blowing. Dr. Wucha fits in with our African solutions for African problems, and he definitely fits in to constructive controversy. And I am honored to share this presentation with you. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to another session of Intellectus Campus, and we are very privileged to have a veteran on this call who is now presenting for the third time, as far as I know, but this is the second in a session on cellular mechanics. And we're focusing very specifically today on cancer. I'm not going to go through Dr. Wucha's extensive bio because it is shared on the group. And if necessary, we will go through it if we have time. But I know there's a lot of content on these slides, and I don't want to waste much further time. Welcome, Dr. Wucha. It is always a privilege to have access to your incredible knowledge and understanding of life at a cellular level. And with that, we're all seeing cancers that we've never seen before in terms of their aggressiveness and in terms of the young people that are affected. And I have recently lost a very good friend to cancer who lived in Victoria Falls, and I think I've shared the difficulty surrounding that with you. So I'm fascinated to hear what you've got to tell us, because as we all know, every single one of us gets cancer every day and probably every minute, but our immune systems contain it. So wonderful to have you on, and we're very much looking forward to being blown away by your knowledge on mitochondria and your wonderful analogies to make things more understandable for us. So thank you, Dr. Wucha.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and welcome everybody here tonight. It's a pleasure to be back, and I'm looking forward to sharing another, I believe, exciting and insightful, make it an hour, maybe a little longer. So here we go. I'm going to focus today. Last time I focused on the mechanisms that drive cells into cancer. Now, today, I'm going to look at very practical and specific you could say healing modalities that are involved as well. And then next time in the third lecture, I would like to share and introduce a new concept that we've started in Namibia to support these cancer patients. So this is like the middle one of another, of another one to come. Here we go. First of all, let's just see. Okay, at the beginning, this is not medical advice. This is not medical treatment, so please be aware. This is really just for interest's sake, and this is really just to keep everybody informed and they can make up their own mind. As you know before, I've spent a lot of time on mitochondria. I think you guys, everybody knows now what they are and they're very, very special little organelles. In fact, I love them because to me, they were pretty much in the center of our biochemical mechanisms. You could really say they're the heart and the brain and the generator in our systems biology that we have inside us. Every living organism has got something like that. And for us humans, this is it. So studies over many, many years have shown that mitochondria are at the core of all these functions. They produce our energy and they are sensing and switching organelles. There are many, many systems, and one of the main signaling systems from mitochondria is free radicals. Now, we've talked about free radicals all the time. I want to spend a couple of minutes just to go back and make sure we're all on the same page with free radicals. What are free radicals? Or we might call them reactive oxygen species. So I've taken oxygen as an atom or as a molecule. Oxygen has got 8 electrons, and as you see here, when oxygen combines with another oxygen, they actually share 2 electrons on the outside shell. So what happens when they lose one of these when they lose one of these electrons on the outside, electron missing, you are a free radical. We're talking about a free radical. So to keep it very simple, free radicals are molecules, not just oxygen, but any molecule that has got too few electrons in their outer cell. So they are desperate to find somebody else that has got an extra electron. And the extra electron normally gets supplied by an electron donor, and the scientific name is an antioxidant. So antioxidants provide electrons and free radicals need electrons. If we go back to the mitochondria, in that process, we can compare it to a normal engine. A normal engine will get petrol or diesel or whatever fuel, and it gets mixed with oxygen, and then often there is a spark or something which ignites the whole thing. So then we have CO2 and water, and we get energy from it. And in that process, there are free radicals, which are normally the leftovers from combustion. Our body is much the same, and we can see here NADH, when it gets reduced, it loses an electron and it pushes one of the protons up into the intermembrane space. This is how mitochondria store their energy. And then when there are lots and lots of protons in this intermembrane space, they get pushed through at the back through the ATPase or complex 5, and this creates new ATP. Long and the short of this, mitochondria make a lot of free radicals. So in order to manage these radicals, we need electron donors. We don't only have reactive oxygen species, we also have reactive nitrogen species. Now, basically, that means that if you have a nitrogen compound, it can also be oxidized and it can also lose electrons. I compare these molecules as the have-nots, the poorest people in our societies. When they get a chance and then the situation is out of hand, they go and loot and take what they need for their living from other places. So they take electrons from other places, and this is what reactive oxygen species do. They take electrons from lipid membranes, from proteins, from enzymes in our body, and this is the way they harm us. So to make a long story short, in our body, in our metabolism, especially the mitochondria, and then very much so if there is infection, our immune system creates free radicals. Foreign substances, biotically active substances create that through inflammation, toxins through inflammation, heavy metal and radiation also through inflammation. You will see I've highlighted the inflammation one. When there's lots of inflammation, there is lots of free radicals, or there are lots of free radicals. And then our body has got a very high need in antioxidants. Okay, so free radicals steal electrons, as I've said. In other words, if they've taken another molecule, they've taken electrons off that molecule, then that molecule becomes a new free radical. And in the process, they can damage DNA. They're not very good for our mitochondria. If they're too many, they can damage enzymes and so on. They can deplete our antioxidant stores, and it's like rusting. If you live near the sea in Namibia, we've got some towns near the sea. The west coast is very, very corrosive. Everything that you leave outside will rust, and they drive more inflammation. So the end result is not a pretty picture. If we have,
Martin,
yes, yes.
So are they discriminate, or do they just cause chaos and steal from whatever's around, or are some things more resilient than others?
As far as I know, they're pretty indiscriminate because it's like a chemical, it's like putting acid or salt in a specific environment that makes it more aggressive and more rusty. So they act on everything. If your body has got a strong you could say how can I say, antioxidant supply, like if your glutathione is high, if your vitamin D is high, vitamin E, and all the antioxidants, if you've got ample supply of that, you will buffer it. It's much like your acid-base relationship. And antioxidants need to be available, but there is a limited supply. So if you don't get it from the outside, you actually can run out of these compensating mechanisms. So to answer their questions, they're indiscriminate and they can damage anything that has not got protective antioxidants. I don't know if that answers the question.
It's a bit like a security system.
Yeah.
Glutathione is a security system.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
So another thing that happens, if our immune system attacks microbes, you have a macrophage that'll go around a microbe, and then there are little vesicles with specific molecules, and they create a superoxide radical. So in other words, it's an O2 and minus. So those are very, very aggressive, and these mechanisms is like chemical war against the microbes. So free radicals will kill bacteria if there are too many, and it's much like I've put in this picture now. This is a German police trying to contain a demonstration, and you can see they spray what's a tear gas or whatever it is there onto the demonstrators. So this is what happens in a mast cell, not in a mast cell only, but also in the macrophage. They surround the cell and they spray them with a very acidic, unpleasant chemical, which in this case is superoxide. And the remaining free radicals float around in our body, and our body has to compensate that. So in other words, if you were in this demonstration, you were just a bystander, you would also get some of those fumes. Anyway, let's move on. So normally mitochondria have got a balanced way of reactive oxygen species. If it gets out of hand, over a long time, we end up in a situation where mitochondria have more and more and more. And you will see here, if they have too little, the cell dies, it takes itself out. It's like a car that hasn't got any petrol anymore. It doesn't really go forward anymore. And then in the biological system, it'll take itself out. In the living systems, if you get more and more and more reactive oxygen, you end up in mitochondrial dysfunction. The membranes eventually get hyperpolarized, and when they get hyperpolarized, all sorts of mechanisms get switched on. The end result will be chronic disease and cancer. So here we are. Mitochondria, as I've said in my previous lecture already, are one of the most central switching stations for starting cancer, moving into tumor progression, and then ultimately into metastasis. And this is a nice summary of mitochondrial function together with, the cancer. Here's a graphic. These are some triggers, and we'll look at some of them. Dysbiosis. Now, dysbiosis can be in any space in our body that is, you could say, aligned with mucous membranes. One of the most favorite is the GI system. We've got another one, which is the mouth, and we'll look at that just now. And these bacteria that are in there, and especially the anaerobic bacteria, create lipopolysaccharides. We'll look at that, and lipopolysaccharides are very, very toxic. They switch on these toll-like receptor 4, and then is NF-kappa B gets switched on an mTOR, and it increases inflammation. It also downregulates Treg and upregulates Th17, which is pro-inflammatory. So ultimately, we have abnormal growth and chronic disease. Okay, so ultimately, we can say mitochondria are responsible for our energy, and they're responsible for switching cells on and off, in other words, making them healthy or not. As to cancer, and this comes from a lecture that I presented last Saturday, in other words, no, Saturday a week ago, and that was a cancer support program. When we delve into cancer and we look at everything cancer does, we go into mitochondria and their healthy situation, eventually we'll end up with cancer. So in that lecture, and you will see it again in other lectures, I've gone and thought long and hard, what could I make, or what sort of definition could I give to cancer? Now, cancer is basically the reverse evolution of complex multicellular system. In other words, you've got a sophisticated system, and that system gets noxic triggers, in other words, toxins and stress from the outside, sublethal all the time. And then the cancer cells decide to hell with us all. We're going to go back to our primordial behavior, which is single cell behavior. That is like a cell before it organized into tissues and bodies. And this is interesting because it encompasses this, you could say, this definition. Take your time, take a snapshot of this, you could say, of this definition, because I really believe, to my knowledge, it encompasses what cancer is. And then everything downstream will make a lot more sense. So in our societies, and we living in Africa, we've got a very diverse society. We've got extremely wealthy components of our society. We've also got extremely poor members of our society. And if you take a big city, for instance, and you take the old city core and imagine something's functioning. You will have streets that have got no potholes. You will have electricity. You will have communication channels that are working. You will have water and sewage that's working. That is like a healthy tissue. Now you have a component in the body that gets stressed, and those are the poor members of our society. So what will they do eventually? They will move to the periphery of the city, and they will start. In Namibia, we call them squatters. You can call them informal settlers. They will just find any piece of land, and they will basically sit there just to survive. If I say just to survive, what are their main activities? To gather food, to gather fuel, energy, and food. And then often they reproduce a lot. In other words, they have got many kids. Affluent members of the society will have 2 or maybe 3 kids. Those people will have more kids. So in other words, what we see to a large extent in our biology is reflected in our social systems, in our social structures. So when we are in medicine and we want to sort out specific disease processes. And this is old. I mean, Hippocrates lived 300 to 400 before Christ, before Christ was born. So in today's times, it's 2,500 years ago. And I think I'm going to run you through something that we as dentists, remember, I'm a dentist. I work with patients every day, and this is in the back of my mind. And I will tell you some things that we do or have done that had a massive effect on the rest of the body. So we had a movie coming out recently, and this movie was called Talking Point, and it had basically a person that had got a root canal and he became extremely sick. And of course, when you go to the official sites of the associations, endodontists or dentists that do, as on a specialist level, they do the root canal treatments. And it's a very sophisticated sort of way of treating teeth. It keeps the tooth in the mouth. It relieves the pain. It solves the problem inside the mouth. But as you will see, there are downstream effects which are not what we actually want and what we don't enjoy. So I'm going to talk about restorations. I'm going to talk about root canal treatments and also about gum disease. So this is where we go. Long ago, we had this amalgam filling. We call them silver fillings or copper fillings or whatever. They are made up of copper, zinc, silver, and sometimes a little bit of tin. And then the other half is 50% mercury. Now, you guys can imagine mercury is not the ideal material to have in your mouth because as you grind on it, as you chew on it, if somebody polishes it, it gets shaved off, it evaporates, and you end up inhaling it, you swallow it, it goes through your mucous membranes. So mercury is not a good thing. And if you look carefully here on this tooth, this mercury works very well to fill the hole, and it's cheap and easy to use. But over time, it expands, and you will see this crack here. Can you see this crack down here? And there is one here as well. So the patient will probably come in one day and he will say, "Doctor, this toothbrush just broke off because this mercury has been swelling. It's expanded over time because it oxidizes, and then it forces this part of the tooth outside, and eventually it just breaks off." So we don't want them anymore in the mouth. What happens with that mercury is mercury loves binding to sulfur. And this is inside a cell. This is the nucleus of the cell, and it's got all the DNA in there. And this is the mitochondria, and it's got some DNA for the mitochondria in there. So 1,000 proteins of the mitochondria are coded for in the nucleus, and about 24 proteins are coded in the nucleus, in the matrix of the mitochondria. So if you have proteins produced in the cytoplasm by, you make it, the nuclear DNA will make an RNA, it'll go into the cytoplasm and it'll make proteins for the mitochondria. Those proteins for the mitochondria then have to be shipped to the mitochondria, and some proteins from the mitochondria will have to be assembled. And for that, you need mitochondrial function, you need oxidative phosphorylation, you need a proper membrane potential, and you need protein transport. Protein transport is done by iron sulfur clusters, this red part here. It's like the truck that takes some parts of components from one town and some parts from another town. They take it to a third place, and there the whole thing gets assembled. If these iron sulfur clusters come into contact with mercury, they will bind onto these iron sulfur clusters. And then these iron sulfur clusters do not work anymore. And then you can't have proteins that can repair your mitochondrial DNA anymore. So what does it mean? If you get mercury into your body, it binds to iron sulfur clusters, which limits eventually DNA repair. And then we have more and more mutations coming out. We then have an accumulation of mutations. And this is what we have. Cancer is a disease of accumulated mutations, cells going haywire. So we have a very, very good link to why mercury should not be in your body. Doesn't matter where or what. Anyway, here is more detail. Mercury binds to these structures. It also binds to DNA. It binds to some of these mechanisms here. And that is why supplementing magnesium, zinc, and selenium is crucial, because you will take some of these components that have bound mercury and you will basically push them out the body with extra magnesium, zinc, and selenium that you push in. Mercury also acts as a hapten. It's a trigger information. It causes an alarm signal in the immune system. So if it causes an alarm system in the immune system, your immune system will get revved up. It'll create reactive oxygen species, and for that, it'll deplete glutathione, because remember, glutathione is used to neutralize reactive oxygen species. So it damages nerve cells, it damages the gut microbiome, and in the gut microbiome, we find that we've got an increase in antibiotic resistance. And because some fungi love heavy metals, you actually give the fungi in your gut something to eat and something to live off. So you will increase your fungal load, you will get antibiotic resistance, all the things that we do not want. Whether it is through mercury fillings or through vaccines, we do not want it in the body. Why vaccines? Because up to now, I don't know, in many it has been removed, but in many it's still present. Vaccine manufacturers introduce mercury into their vaccines. They add it as an adjuvant to the vaccine to make the immune system cross and make it more responsive. So they actually do get a better immune response, but there is a price to pay. So if people are sick, amalgam should be removed in a safe and sophisticated manner, and we will look at that now. So going to your dentist and saying, listen, I've heard amalgam is bad for me, please take it out, is just not good enough. There is a specific sequence. You can imagine if you start drilling here in the mouth and the guy swallows the water that's there, you can say all the particulate matter that is not evacuated at that stage, and it's quite a lot, will get swallowed into the gut. It'll end up in these amazing system, the GI system. And remember, the GI system has got the surface of 2 tennis courts. So the chances of it sitting there for years, number one, and also for you absorbing every little bit of mercury that you had in your mouth and you now pushed it in your gut, is virtually 100%. So don't start drilling before the gut is healthy, and also do not go to a dentist that has not got the sophisticated measures that I will show you now. So what do we use? Number one, we measure the conductance of these mercury fillings in the mouth. We take the one with the highest, you could say, highest voltage, and we remove it first. We use a rubber dam. You will see just now there is extra evacuation. We use a lot of water, and we do not cross the midline. I cannot tell you why. This is called the Huggins protocol from an American dentist, Hal Huggins. He worked for 20, 30, 40 years on that. He spent his whole lifetime. He doesn't live anymore, but he left us with an amazing protocol to use. These are additional measures that you can use. Chlorella, why? It binds heavy metals. There is a process that was used at Anglo American. It's called bioleaching. So what do? They take chlorella and grow it in big ponds, and they spray it on the old gold mine dumps. And these chlorella algae with the water siphon through the basically the mine dumps, and they collect them in pipes at the bottom. And then they've got a chemical process where they extract whatever gold and mercury there was. So chlorella binds gold and heavy metals and mercury. So if the mines use it, you must know it works, and you can use it in the body. But if you give people chlorella before you drill your fillings out, you actually do help them, because if that stuff's in this GI system, it'll help binding that stuff. So cilantro is a natural substance, and it basically liberates mercury. Cilantro liberates mercury from fat deposits from your brain and all sorts of other places. But you must be careful, because if you liberate it and you don't have a binding system, it'll just get relocated to other places in your body. So it's a very tricky and sophisticated system. So here we have the measuring system. It's called a Rita meter. You hook this little wire part into the tooth. Then you put the probe onto the filling, and it'll give you a reading there. You can see the reading. Okay, so a normal tooth will have 0 to 5 microvolts. Amalgam fillings, the highest that I've measured is 185 microvolts. Our brain works with 7 to 10, you could say 0 to or 5 to 10 nanovolts. That's 1,000 times smaller than these guys. So we've got 1 microvolt is 1,000 nanovolts. So if you have an amalgam with 185 microvolts, it's 180 times 1,000 more than your brain currents. So we have to understand that to say your brain's not going to feel anything if you have an upper molar and it's like 3 centimeters away from the brain is just wishful thinking. It will have an effect. What's interesting here is I measured this mouth, and these 2 gold fillings had very, very low voltage flow. This one is a filling. It's got a white composite filling, and as you see, there is no current flowing. So this is great news. Then we go to the amalgam fillings. And amalgam fillings, this one had 86 and this one had 162, and they're against each other. The worst situation you can have is a gold filling together with an amalgam filling, because then you've got like 6 metals together. Anyway, so then you put a rubber dam in. It's a rubber membrane. Normally it's latex. We punch a hole in it, and then we've got these tiny little cloths that clamp onto the tooth, and you can prevent any particulate matter getting into the throat of the patient. This is a really good idea. And then we've got some sealants, composites that we put around the side so nothing can get in here, and then we remove this stuff with a drill and lots of water and high vacuum suction. In my specific practice, we've basically designed extra suction. This is like an industrial blower but reversed. It looks like a vacuum cleaner pipe next to your face, and it sucks 4 to 5 cubic meters per minute. So if you have it run for make it 10 minutes, you will evacuate your whole room once, and that cleans the air of mercury vapors. Also, you want at least 50 milliliters of water per minute. Why? To flush out everything, to keep it in suspension, and also to stop overheating. Because if you take a drill with no water and drill on a tooth, that mercury will evaporate and it'll be in the air. And if you've got a closed room without this stuff, you will inhale the mercury for the rest of the day. and that's not what you want. Dentists are crazy. We all know that the saying, as mad as a hatter, in old England, in the Industrial Revolution, they used to make top hats, these black fancy hats. Top hats are made from silk, and silk gets immersed in mercury vapor. So they used to use mercury and heated it up and put the felt heads in a container, and after an hour or whatever, they pull them out and they were black. The white silk turned black, and the fumes were in the workshop, and the fumes were everywhere, and they inhaled it every day. And at the end of their, not at the end of their life, but around about 40, 50 years old, they were crazy because their brain had been cooked by the mercury fumes. As mad as a hatter. Okay, so dentists are not far behind. All right, so this is what it looks like when you've sort of removed the metal, then you clean up all the little dark spots and you prepare it for a composite filling. Composite fillings are white fillings. It's like a plastic concrete filled with tiny little glass particles that gets hardened when you put the light on it. So everybody's feeling good. It looks good. Everybody's chuffed. Your tooth got new teeth. They look pretty. People are very enthusiastic about the looks. But then if you look with the functional medicine mind, what's in these composite fillings? There are specific monomers, specific chemicals in there that can cause DNA damage, they cause mitochondrial damage, they do everything that we do not want. And I will give you the solution later on. So bisphenol A is an industrial chemical. It's in all plastic bottles. It's in plastic cutlery, cookery. It's in plastic kiddies' toys. It's in dental sealants and also composites. So that's not good news. What does it do? These endocrine or these BPAs and these chemicals are called endocrine disrupting chemicals. Okay. So they act, no, they bind like hormones, but they obviously don't act like hormones. So they get involved in your reproductive, in your nerve system, in your immune system. And they can, if you have a dose high enough, you can have neurodevelopment problems in kids. So, and some of them have been shown to cause carcinoma. So what do we do about it? I'll come to the solution just now. So composites and dental filling materials, this is a recent article, and this is just a slide that shows you all the places where they get involved. So it's not a pretty picture. I've given you the article here at the top for the picture. You can go and look. Here's another article. It's called Endocrine Disruptors. And this one is a bit older. It was 2016's, but it's the same story. Another article, Hormone-Dependent Cancers. It is really something we have to look wider. We can't just work in the mouth and say everything's cool. We didn't do anything else. Yes, from a dental point of view, that's what we were taught. That's what we must do. But surely we can use our brain and try and look a bit further. So here we are. These substances actually do come involved in cancer growth. Remember, we talked about NF-kappa B. There's also mTOR. And then we have neurodegenerative diseases, which are the famous ones, AD and PD, in later life. So those are horrible substances, but as so often, it depends on the dose. So forestry, luckily, I haven't brought these articles in here. There's not enough time. But if you do a dental filling and you go to a dentist who knows what he's doing and he cures those materials properly, the amount of BPA and monomers that leaches from these fillings is so small that up
Right, what's happened? Sorry, everyone, we seem to have lost connection. Apologies, everybody. We seem to have had a tech problem. Okay, let's continue.
You will have creams that you put on your body and all sorts of underarm deodorants and all that sort of stuff. It's a whole topic on itself. The industry using it all over the show, and we just putting it onto our bodies, into our bodies indirectly. Right, let's look at gum disease. So gum disease, this is the tooth here, and this is the gum. The gum has got a little pocket. It's like a fold or a little crevice around the tooth, and this is normally 2 to 3 millimeters deep. We have got attached gingiva with lots of collagen fibers. It attaches onto the bone. And then on the inside, we've got a special type of epithelium that attaches to the root or well to the enamel of the tooth. But if you don't clean your teeth all the time, you have a biofilm, bacteria like algae in a fish pond or in a reservoir. It'll grow over time. And you will have more and more and more bacteria there, and they will change over time. So first of all, there are harmless ones. After 3 months, they will become anaerobic. So in other words, they will live without oxygen. You will have more pathogens, and the pathogens will have substances that go into the tissue. And then all hell breaks loose because now you have inflammation. And you can see here, these are neutrophils. There will be macrophages, and there will be the mediators of inflammation all secreted here in order to fight these bacteria and to ward off the microbial war. And also, you can see here at the bottom, there are osteoclasts. Now, osteoclasts are osteolytic cells. They eat the bone, and they do that in an inflammatory process. So eventually, if you don't clean this up, you will find that your bone gets eaten away, and the ultimate result of that is that your tooth becomes loose and then falls out. This is an extreme example. You can see right around the tooth, there is no bone anymore. The tooth has had massive periodontal disease, also disease between the roots. It doesn't have a hole. It doesn't have caries at this stage. But the periodontal abscess has eaten away the bone, and this is what the tooth looks like when you extract it. You can see the biofilm, the bacteria have actually won the war. They've taken over the natural structure, and the body will think this is like a thorn in your foot. There is nothing that the body can see from this side that looks like its own tissue anymore. The tissue inside the bone is, we call it granulation tissue. It's sort of mesodermal inflammatory infiltrate. It's filled with immune cells. It's filled with necrotic tissue. It's filled with protective tissue layers. So the body tries and ward off the infection. And when we take out a tooth, it's really important that we take out that tissue as well, because as long as that tissue is sitting there at the bottom, the bone might grow over it, and then this tissue will remain inside the bone, which is not a good idea. Okay. Jackie, are you still there?
I am. I've just removed my video because of signal.
Okay, so because I see the picture is gone. But anyway, that's great. I'll just carry on taping like this. It's just that we don't have these little goodies on the top.
I'm back.
Yeah, okay. All right, so the tissue that I showed you reminds me of this. So you have, say, the tooth on that side with lots of bacteria. This is your immune system. It sprays water, it sprays tear gas, remember, and all sorts of chemicals. And the police here is like the tissue that wards off the infection against the tooth root. So long ago, when we had patients coming in, we would take a probe like this. It had a round little tip with a ball, and it had markings 3, 6, 9 millimeters, and we would probe, and then it would start bleeding, and we said bleeding on probing is one parameter that we would note down or write down, and then the depth of that would say, okay, this is the damage that's happened. But it's really not very clever because the damage has been done. So what do we do nowadays? Nowadays, we use a microscope, and we call it phase contrast microscopes. So what I did here is I took a video of a face sample of dental plaque, and I put it on the microscope, and I created a video. And you can see here, you can see lots of bacteria. They're highly motile. It's an active biofilm, but they all float around loosely. And then you've got immune cells here. Look at these immune cells. And then you've got some plasmodiums here. These are protozoans. If you see those, you know there is massive gum disease. And eventually, these bacteria will eat these immune cells because there are just too many of them. So this is the next stage. What you see here, now the bacteria become more and more organized. You can see here they bundle together. And it's interesting, this tissue at the top is a massive, you could say, bunch of policemen. It's your immune system with the immune cells. Here's another one. And these bacteria all over, and here they start organizing themselves. It's like forming a group. You could really say this is the first part of single cell organisms organizing themselves into little units. In other words, the microbial equivalent of the first primitive tissue where cells work together. This is fascinating to watch. And then you will see a third slide. And here I've written quorum sensing. Now watch this. Okay, my battery's running low. Thank you for letting me know. Okay. So we have quorum sensing here. And look at this. They've organized themselves into a whole row of microbes and they work together. Isn't this fascinating? This is like
Martin, sorry
yes,
to interrupt you. Can you just explain quorum sensing?
yeah,
You know, I mean, those of us who speak biochemistry sometimes forget that there's a lot of people that don't.
okay. Quorum sensing means that bacteria or microbes start organizing, they work in they work together. So you can see that here they don't work single anymore. They formed a mass of people that do the same thing. It's like a huge group dancing together, or a huge group like a Roman legion fighting together and attacking the enemy in a coordinated fashion. So
a bit like in a military, if you were going to use foot soldiers, a bunch of chaotic foot soldiers all throwing
yeah,
stones are
yeah,
not going to do
yeah,
too much. But if
yeah.
they organize themselves, or if particularly if they create a line of defense and then a coordinated attack, they're likely to be much more effective. Would you say that's a good analogy?
Yeah, look, the bacteria in this case become much more clever and sophisticated. They work together. You can see here, it is a whole line of defense immune cells, neutrophils, macrophages, they're all sitting here. And against them, you have the bacteria. You see that. And they try and get in here. This is one of my favorite slides. I've done many, many videos, and it's actually really lovely if you see it under a microscope. Anyway, so that's the bacteria in the mouth. And remember, I said they were gram positive. I'm sorry, our pictures are under there. This is gram positive. And they work without oxygen, and they have got these little spikes on the surface. It's called lipopolysaccharide. And remember, lipopolysaccharide binds to toll-like receptor 4. and that sets off all sorts of pro-inflammatory systems. So it sets off monocytes, dendritic cells, macrophages, and eventually B cells, which then make antibodies. Okay, so this is once again the summary that I had. Lipopolysaccharide from your gum tissue will infiltrate into your gums, and it'll circulate in your body, and it'll ramp up inflammation all over the body. And this is why there's a correlation between heart disease and gum disease. That's nothing new. Every doctor should know that. Every dentist should know that, because this is the way that the body gets affected by these bugs in your gum. All right, so we've done the fillings, we've done the gum disease, and now we look at the root canal. Now, say you have a filling and it's very deep, and eventually some bacteria get into the nerve tissue, the pulp as we call it, and the pulp tissue gets highly inflamed and eventually it dies. You've got terrible toothache. You go to the dentist, he takes a drill, opens it up, and puts a little needle-like goodie in there. We'll look at it now. He cleans it, and eventually he fills it, and it looks like this, and the dentist is very proud, and we are very, we think we've done the right thing, and I suppose we have, for the mouth, for the tooth. In an x-ray, this is where you start. You can see this is a temporary filling. It goes right into the pulp, so the dentist will remove that. You will start cleaning these canals, and he will fill them, and this is what it looks like. And he will charge you a pretty nice sum for it, so it's good business as well. If you look under the microscope, this is a model of dentine. Dentine has got millions and millions of little tubules, and this is what it looks like. So in my world, I don't know how any dentist is really able to clean all this lot. And if you look at the three-dimensional structure of a root canal, you can see here, it's not just a round pipe-like canal that goes down. And eventually, when we remove these teeth and we put them in the test tube and we culture these, or we use PCR testing, we find these bacteria. And this Enterococcus is a nasty one. There are very few things that kill it. Anyway, it'll grow, it'll sit in these. This is a tooth that I extracted. It had a crown on it, it had a core on it, and it had a pin in it. Everything was done that dentists normally do. And if you look at the tip here, there's some spaces that are not filled. And all these little dark places is where you could say the bacteria that make pigments have gone into the dental tubules. You'll see the dental tubules now. These are the instruments that we use. Little files and little spiral burrs. And when you take them under the electron microscope and you put them in a tooth and you look at it in magnification, and this is only 50 to 500 micron. Okay, 50 times, it's 500 micron this. So this would be about 10 micron. And you look at the tip of the root, you can see there is no chance that this file can clean this area properly. Here is the main canal. At the top, there's another one. It's an additional canal. So imagine filling this, there will be another one there. So this is why I'm not very fond of root canals. I have to do them sometimes to relieve pain. This is dentine. You can imagine these are bacteria and this is fractured dentine. These guys are inside these tubules. You can see they can grow in there, and it's warm and moist and lovely for them. And this is the tip of the file that you put in there. So if you can tell me how you can take this instrument and clean out these little guys from these billions and billions of little canals, then I'll give you, I don't know, I suppose it'll give you the Nobel Prize. I don't think you can. Going back to the official bodies. So now if you tell this to the endodontist or to the dentist, they will say, yes, but we've done it for hundreds of years or over 100 years with overwhelming success rates. If they only look at the tooth and if they only look at the mouth, yes, they have got a very good success rate, although many, many, many teeth fail after a couple of years. Because initially, once you've cleaned it, once you've done your thing, it may be fine, but over time, bacteria will grow in there, and over time, they will recapture the whole space. A normal molar tooth, if you add it all up, you add all these microtubules together, can have up to 30 kilometers of dental tubules. So I don't think anybody can clean that. Of course, then there are other heart journals. Heart journals, they look at it from the body side, and they look at root canal problems, and there is the risk of heart disease. And as I've said, you understand now, or you should understand now, how those two are linked. Because if it's in your gum, or if it's inside the root canal with all these canals, surely then there is a connection. Yet, the official bodies are still arguing against it. It's like the FDA that denies everything. There is no valid scientific evidence. So, who's going to research that? Nobody of interest. The endodontists don't want to know about it. Maybe the cardiologists will research it one day. I don't know. But besides a double-blind placebo-controlled study that would be the major thing for evidence-based medicine, we can also use our common sense. And it's not really that difficult if you look at the microstructures to find the connection there. These are other pictures. This is infected dentine. Now you can see the little cocci sitting in the dental tubules. These are collagen fibers of your dentine, Diplococcus, all sorts of little things. It's just a mess. Anyway, so there is a link between rotten teeth and heart disease. Let's leave it at that. And my take from this is you cannot, as a dentist, it's not that the dentist is a bad person, but the techniques that we have today are just not good enough. So I'm not trying to run down dentistry or my colleagues at all. I'm just trying to entice them and to ask them to use their God-given thinking and brain to come up with new and better ideas. This will take time. We will have to find new ways, but at least we have to acknowledge the shortcomings. If you have a patient that is very sick, I would really recommend, and you really want to give him all chance of healing, and he has got many rotten teeth or infected teeth or root canal treated teeth or teeth with amalgams in, please consider seriously of removing them, because they will trigger the body the whole time. Now, this is a silly analogy maybe, but a tooth like that on the left is pretty much like a foot on the right. And I don't know of any surgeon that would come along and say, listen, let's keep that tooth. Let's put a whatever around where the brown meets the living tissue, and the guy can at least walk on it. That's not what a surgeon would do. All right. So this is just more rhetoric of the endodontist. I think we're going to step off that. So why doesn't it happen?
Martin, sorry to
Yes.
interrupt you. This is
Yeah.
fascinating for me. As you know, I was attacked by an olive and a Greek salad that I thought was depipped and broke a tooth, much to the mirth of everybody else other than me, and everybody else who was sitting at the table, I might add. But one of the things I'm very interested in is argentum. And for those who don't know what that is, I would recommend that you look it up. But the interesting thing is, in its nanoparticulate form, it's an electron donor. It kills 650 different organisms, including Enterococcus faecalis.
Okay.
And I'm also becoming concerned about how I clean my teeth. And I've never been an electric toothbrush fan, but I'm changing my mind. But then you've also got to be careful of what you clean it with, because you need to remove the biofilm. And we know that argentum does remove biofilms. But just in terms of, I get asked so many questions as a doctor, and we never ever, I don't even know how many teeth a human has, because I was never taught anything about teeth.
Yeah.
But but if I look at fractures, for example, I know how to treat a fracture, and a fractured tooth should behave the same way as any other fractured bone in terms of its healing. So just getting back to the question of that patients ask me, if you do lose a tooth, is it better to have an implant or a bridge? What should we be cleaning our teeth with? And are electric toothbrushes better than normal toothbrushes? And what can we use that gets deep into the dentine that can actually clean our mouths? Because if we look at Chinese medicine and the meridians that run with these, with our teeth, it becomes even more interesting. So I injured my front incisor, and that meridian tracks in this direction, and the radiation of the pain went into the back of my eye and over the back of my occiput, or over the top of my head and down into my occiput. So I know that's a lot of questions in one, but I guess the big questions are, what do you think of implants? What should we be cleaning our teeth with? What should we be rinsing our mouths out with? And does the tooth actually communicate with meridians in the body?
Jackie, I think you've just given us a fantastic rundown for another lecture. Because I'm happy to have a lecture on teeth and dentistry, and there are quite a few that I have that are really exciting. But for today, that would actually go far and far beyond what we want to do today. So let's maybe keep those ideas, jot them down, and we can build a lecture on that. And I'm sure there will be other people who would like the same, who have the same questions. That's okay with you?
That's 100%. Well, I'm very conscious of time.
Okay.
I'm watching the clock at the moment because we're running on German Namibian time. So I'll get shouted at if I run over.
No, it's not a problem. So coming back to the tooth, this is the basic structure. So on the left here, we've got living tissue. So there's arterial blood being pumped into the pulp. The pulp has got a lot of mesodermal tissues. These are called odontoblasts. Those are cells that make dentine. And they have these little tubules in their little processes with nerves in these tubules. So this is living and this is liquid. And if you've got a tooth where the gum is receded, it becomes very sensitive for two reasons. If you blow on it, if you get hot or cold on it, if you put honey on it or chocolate, because this liquid gets moved around. It's called the hydrostatic theory, and then this nerve gets stimulated and it ends up in a sensitivity or pain impulse. If it's just a little bit, it's cool. But if it becomes more and more and more, this pulp gets inflamed. And inflammation has got one thing with it, that is swelling. Now, if you've got an arm, it can swell. But in a tooth that is a confined space, it can't swell. So the pressure builds up, and eventually the pressure is so high that it actually strangles circulation. So it's an inflammatory process that, if it gets out of hand, kills the pulp tissue. It's much like putting an elastic band around your arm, or putting elastic bands around a little goat, around the testes, and that basically strangles the blood supply, and that's how you castrate lots of little goats or sheep. They run around and eventually their little testicles fall off. So strangulation and the pulp arising from excessive inflammation will kill the pulp. Now, when the pulp is dead and you look at the microstructure, you've got these microtubules here, and this is a top-down look at it. This is where the odontoblast process is used to be. They're surrounded by collagen fibers, and what they've done here, they removed with acid a lot of the calcified tissue, so you only have the collagen left behind. So this is what it looks like. So when it's alive, the blood comes in here and the lymph moves out and it gets recirculated through this ligament into the body. So it's a circulating process. It's like a green tree. When you pull out the nerve, this is the situation. And then the green tree moves to a dead tree. And we all know a green tree will not be attacked by these beetles and borers. The moment the tree dies, or when you see the first marks of this on a tree, you know it's busy dying. So this is the natural process happening inside the mouth again. And if you want a dead tree, you can carve chairs out of it, and maybe you can carve little figures out of, you know, ivory in that. Ivory is dentine. You can carve it. The enamel on top is much, much harder. You cannot carve it with a knife. So the elephant and the hippo have got very little dentine, I mean enamel. They have got mainly dentine, and that is what they wear down and what they can carve. All right, so a tooth that is dead resembles this structure. If you have a building in a city and there's lights and water still available, it's only a matter of time. We have people, you know, vagrants occupying the space. This one might have been in Johannesburg. This one is in Germany. So it happens all over the show if there is no circulation. So let's go to a sample here. This was a 52-year-old German patient. She had excellent dentistry. Some of it was done by me. The implants were done by me. Many of the root canals were done in Germany. And in a dental space, they were all done very well. But if you look carefully, some of them had infections. This tooth had an infection on it, and so on. And ultimately, she came along, and all these teeth weren't 100% in order. They all had inflammatory reactions. So she presented with leukemia, and she went to Germany. She came back. She said to me, please remove all these teeth with the root canals. And you can imagine, I was very, very reluctant to do that. I couldn't just, I mean, imagine this. This is 1, 2, 3, it's about 11 or 12 teeth. The question is not just removing the teeth, which is traumatic, which is against of what we've been taught, but what do you do afterwards? Because the same patient that now asks you desperately to remove the teeth will stand in front of you and then say, how must I eat now? So those are the practical parts. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I removed the teeth. She volunteered for a plastic denture, and she said to me, it's either my life or my teeth, and I chose my life. I saw her last week. We went to her blood work. This has been like 10 years ago. Her leukemia is gone. She is healthy. Everything's fine. Her blood work looks pretty cool. So I can't tell you that is what did it. I don't want to say it, but I'm pretty sure it was one of the factors that drove her into that direction. All right. Now we've done with the dentist. Let's look about the doctors. So in modern medicine, we've got a monopoly game. Patient walks in, he's got certain symptoms and disease state, things that we do a consultation, we do some tests, we give him a name for what he's supposed to have. And once I've made it in bold, because often when patients get a diagnosis, they feel pretty relieved. At least they know what it is, and because they've been told when you know what it is, we have a pill that fixes it. He then gets a prescription, he goes to the pharmacies, he gets some medication, and he gets told, we'll see you in 4 weeks' time to see how it goes. And he comes back, some of the symptoms are better, but there might be new symptoms. So he goes back to new symptoms. That's why I call it monopoly, because he goes back to start, and then it starts again. And I think we are trained, and I include myself because I went through the same school, and my younger colleagues that are listening tonight will probably know what it's been like. They've been taught a very rigid, systematic system. It's a tough course, and they end up doing what they were taught, and it's cool. They can get along with it. But after a couple of years, when you wake up and say, look, am I really treating the disease, or am I actually just manipulating symptoms? So we go back to Hippocrates, and he's had many clever, comments. Some of them apparently are not from him, but nevertheless, they make sense. So endless insults against the nature of our body. Now, I've shown you that with mitochondria in the previous lectures, and I think it's really just common sense. So what we do when we have a person that comes along, we first want to try and see where does all this start? What are the drivers? And then how can we change it? Can we remove the drivers? And that I would call it the first step. And often that's enough. And then the solution for healing include very often to re-establish your mitochondria and also get them going so they function optimally. The big question in healthcare should not be what is the diagnosis. It should also not be what can I do pharmaceutically wise. First question is, why is my body doing this? And it's a really simple question. And if we look at a lifetime of a person, or like a lifespan, if you do one little thing that is wrong or bad for your body every day, you won't die the first day you do it. It'll take a long time. Let's take smoking. Smoking again, junk food again and again. And eventually, after 40, 50, 60 years, you will have really a body that doesn't show that it's been hammered. On the other hand, if you do one little positive thing every day, you have a good, so it's cumulative. Early symptoms are this, and then we call it early detection. Now, in cancer, people are remember, you might have cancer cells from 10 years onwards. They cannot be detected with normal systems. They are there and they will be around. The first time you can detect them is like a little nodule, maybe in your breast or somewhere else. And then we call it early detection. And this is where the modern focus is. You want early detection. There's nothing wrong with it. This is supposedly late detection, and then comes interventions here. What I'm asking is, what happens here in this time? Why don't we get involved here? You may call it preventive medicine, you may call it preventive living, you may call it lifestyle changes and all. We as healers and doctors should teach and educate our patients about this stretch here, this pre-clinical symptom phase, because this is where we can make the biggest choice. And we don't need to be a doctor to do that. We can be a lifestyle coach, we can be a dietitian, whatever you are. Physical education, sports, all sorts of things that can be employed to help there. So then we come to evidence-based medicine. I've got another lecture that goes, it's about the history of modern medicine. Jackie, that's also a really nice one. I think we can introduce that sometime, so we'll have enough material to keep everybody happy and entertained, and they hopefully learn something. So evidence-based medicine was started in the 60s, I think 62, 68. The concept was, let's use science, and they use double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. And this became the golden standard for these trials. The good part is, out of those trials came the best scientific-based evidence that we could use to say this treatment is working or this drug is working. The downside of it was mostly about drugs, and it was mostly about single drugs. Now, biology tells us that single drugs work differently than multiple drugs because they interact. And single drugs can be measured easily, but the moment you introduce 2 or 3 or 4 systems into a body, after 3 different drugs, you don't know what they're doing anymore. So, and also, all these big trials cost a huge amount of money, and because they cost a huge amount of money, nobody will do it unless they can earn money afterwards. So we understood that pharmaceutical companies would do these trials, and then as a result, today's evidence-based medicine is primarily framed and based on these trials that are done by pharmaceutical companies, and I will come to that later. So evidence-based medicine is what everybody else is doing that is accepted. It has been researched. This is what we learn when we go on courses. Normally, when our medical associations invite us for a continued professional development course, you get these points, and we all have to have them to keep our license. Then we go there, we walk into the venue, and at the entrance of the venue, there are the flags, there are the banners of whoever has sponsored that event. Now, those are normally the people that want you to know about their products, in business terms, it's plain marketing. We get sold it as continued education. I want to be just and say some of it is also educational, but a lot of it is promotional. So we have to keep that in the back of our minds. I'm not saying it's all wrong. It's just a matter of being a fact. That is how it works. Also,
Martin,
yes,
sorry to interrupt you, but one of the things I've been approached by on several occasions is to have these sessions funded by the pharmaceutical company.
yeah,
And I'd like just to state for the record that I have refused, because what we say on this platform is doctors and dentists and integrative medicine and nurses' opinions, and we will not have this material tainted is the wrong word, but I don't ever want to be accused of being a glorified drug rep. And that is why we do promote specific brands or allow anybody to come onto these talks to promote their product. And I think doctors need to become aware that CPD is, in fact, marketing. And what we're trying to do on this platform is for the doctors like yourself, who actually have a passion about teaching young people how to think again. It's very important that we stay away from being associated with those banners and those brands. So thank you for saying that, because I've been banging my head against a brick wall for some time on exactly this subject. CPD should not be marketing.
look, everything has got its place, and people often ask me, are you for alternative medicine? And I straight say no. Alternative medicine has got the inherent wording in it that it's either the one or the other, which is not true. If I need antibiotics in the mouth to manage severe abscess, if I use local anesthetics to numb a tooth to work on it, I'm using drugs. So yes, if I go to a CPD event and they talk about local anesthetics, they talk about antibiotics to manage oral pathogenesis and oral microbes, I can go there and listen to that. There's nothing wrong with it. But I have got in the back of my mind the stuff that we're going to talk about just now. So there are two sides to it. And yes, I've gone the route. I gave a couple of lectures to pharmaceutical companies, and then eventually they came along and said, look, we love your lectures, but you have to sign this and this and this, and we want to see your lecture before you talk. And I said, in that case, I'm not available anymore. You need to find somebody else. So this is much the same. We have to decide on where we are. I want to show both sides of the coin. I don't only want to show the one side. Okay, so medical aid.
I'm also conscious of time, because we are running on Namibian time, and you and I could probably talk for 4 hours
Yeah,
and not get bored. So I'll stop interrupting you, and I think we need to move quite quickly,
yeah.
just looking at the time.
Okay, so medical aids pay for it, and also it's legal. So many patients come in, they've been to the doctor, and the doctor has got a viral infection, respiratory infection just started. And I said, what did you get? I got some anti-inflammatories, I got some antibiotics, and I got some cortisone. Okay, so now I will say, okay, why do you get the antibiotics? They said, the doctor says it's for my cold. I said, okay, but they know about bacteria now. So the doctor does it for two things. He's done everything he could. So nobody can say he didn't do his job, okay, or he was negligent. And secondly, the patients expect it, because if you say to a patient, go home, go into bed and lie there, they feel you're a bad doctor. So they've been conditioned to believe that the moment you give them something that is fetched from the pharmacy, the doctor is doing his job. And maybe there's some truth in it, but antibiotics do not work for viruses. Cortisone shouldn't be given early in a viral infection because it'll limit the immune response against those viruses. So it can be given later, when after 10 days when you can't manage, but we have to look back at what's sensible. And then, of course, the last 4 years have shown us what you are allowed to do. So we've had the debacle with certain drugs that were used for others, and we wanted to rebrand them or reuse them for other stuff. And people that did it were basically, prosecuted and what all sorts of things. So we live in a crazy world with a scary picture of our industry. And evidence-based medicine has become the golden calf. Everyone looks up to it and nobody sees the limitations of it. Evidence-based medicine entices many doctors to only believe in that, and unfortunately, it limits or it switches off their own thinking. So, what I've experienced personally in evidence-based medicine in the COVID pandemic, I had some colleagues with confidence giving remdesivir to people in their hospitals. And as we know today, it basically destroyed their kidneys. It basically killed the patients. And then us that used ivermectin, we got prosecuted. And this is the end result of overzealous evidence-based medicine. So I just want to leave it here and just want to say we have to get back to basics and we have to switch on our logical thinking. So let's jump back. We go back to drugs that are toxic to mitochondria. Look at these ones. They are very prominent drugs. Voltaren, cataflams, all these things we use virtually every day. But remember, they damage mitochondria. Statins are really vicious. A lot of heart medications, okay? Antiarrhythmetics, which are dished out now in the post-COVID time. Many people have got arrhythmias, and these heart medications get, you doctors in the audience will understand them. You will probably use them all the time. Then we've got what I use in my dental practice. I also use tetracyclines for gum disease. Yes, I know that, but I use them locally only. I don't give them to patients. Then we've got the antipsychotics, the antidepressants, and even the Valium and those guys, benzodiazepines. Remember, mitochondria are ancient bacteria. Okay, so mitochondria are ancient bacteria. If you give antibiotic, you will damage them. And this is an article you could say 6 years ago. So it's a recent article. Barbiturates, cancer drugs, drugs for neurodegenerative disease, and then even here. And recently, FLCCC brought out a cancer monologue, they call it, a support program for cancer. Now, it's a fantastic document, and I'm sure it'll do a huge amount of good in society. The one critique that I have is they're using drugs like metformin and those things that definitely don't go well with mitochondria. And mitochondria, as I've said, are the heart and the soul of what we want to achieve in healthcare. Antiretrovirals, mood stabilizers, and then even Parkinson's diseases. So mitochondria, once again, sound like a record with a stuck record, or the beginning and the end of many of the things we do. So here we are. I'll give you time to read this quickly, or I'll read it for you, for somebody who's just listening. The sun is just set on the biggest scam on history. The last 4 years have left us all with emotional scars. The entities that we once trusted have all lied to us. The drivers have been money, greed, corruption, and power. The agencies that were supposed to protect us, like medicine and law, have failed us. Humanity is hungry for a new kind of trust, sources of information and help. We need a new system, a system of human to human. Dear colleagues, dear friends, dear members of Intellectual Campus. I thank you for your time. I hope you learned something. It's not always easy to listen to different opinions, to new things, to new ideas that are contra to what you believe. But it's the only way you will learn new things. If you always listen to stuff that you know and believe in already, you cannot learn anything new. So force yourself to look at stuff that is unpleasant, to read stuff that is not conventional. And that is your duty. I suppose that's your life journey on this earth if you want to heal and if you want to help our fellow human beings. I thank you very much. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. And Jackie, thank you for the opportunity. And I'm looking forward to your questions.
Okay, Pride, have we stopped the recording? Great. Martin, thank you for that. I am so grateful for that presentation, and thank you for joining us again tonight. We've got two questions. One is, what is a xenobiotic? If you can give us an example. And another question that's very important for us. I mean, I grew up in a mining community, and I've seen how much mercury is used in the mining community. And our top three industries in Zimbabwe are mining, agriculture, and tourism. So what advice would you give to people who actually want to avoid mercury? I know that a lot of people work with it without masks in this country. And so question one is, what's a xenobiotic? And question two is, how do you protect yourself in the mining industry?
Yes, hello everybody. A xenobiotic is basically a substance that comes from outside the body. It's foreign, and it has a biotic or biology effect. And in the terms of the lecture, it is basically plasticizes petrochemical substances that actually do evaporate, and in other words, they're in the air, you inhale them, or you put them on your skin, or you swallow them, or whatever. They get into your system and they act, well, maybe they don't act like a hormone, but they bind to hormone receptors, and they can either block them or cause the wrong effect of the hormone. So it's a foreign, you could say artificial substance in this case, that is able to interact with your biological system. Okay. Getting back to mercury in the mine dumps. Yeah, mercury has got various forms. There's elemental mercury, which is the stuff that we find in nature. It's, normal day, you could say day temperature, normal 20 to 30 degrees. It's liquid, but it evaporates quite easily. If you put a drop of mercury on a table or in a dish, it'll be gone in a couple of days. So it goes into the air. And that, you could say, volatile mercury is easy to inhale. It goes through latex, it goes through masks, so masks won't help you. If it touches your skin, you will absorb quite a bit of it. And the body can manage it, but it can't eliminate it that quickly. So what it does is mercury ends up in our fatty tissues. Fatty tissues is often the subdermal tissues. Now, if you're a huge, big, fat guy with a little bit of mercury, you could say, okay, it gets distributed over the body and nothing serious will happen. But it just depends on the amount of stuff you get in. If you don't have enough fatty tissue, or otherwise you have it accumulated in your fatty tissue like many other fat-soluble toxins, and you decide you're going to go on a diet and you lose 30 pounds or 60 pounds, all that stuff gets liberated, becomes free. And then your liver and your kidneys and your skin have to basically bind it and eliminate it. And that's quite a tricky story. So for the mining, I've got no idea. It's an environmental issue. I don't know if the mining is the biggest one. If you have coal burning, anthracite coal burning power plants, there is quite a bit of mercury in natural coal, in anthracite and that sort of coal. And apparently the biggest amounts come from coal-fired power stations in the world. So Zimbabwe might be specific because they use it in the mining industry. They use it for gold mining, for leaching and all that. And this is why I gave that example for bioleaching, because they use chlorella algae to bind this stuff. So as we, when we start drilling on the people's teeth, we also give them like 20 little chlorella pills. They swallow them and they get dispersed over the gut surface. So any possible little granule of amalgam or mercury that ends up in the gut has got a good chance of being bound, and then you can excrete it. I don't have a good answer for the mining industry. I think that's an environmental issue. The people that are there, unfortunately, often don't realize what's happening with them. Similar to the hatters, the mad hatters in the old industrial times, UK or England. I'm sure they weren't aware of what was happening to them. They were making black cylinder heads for the hats for the nobility, and in the process they became mad. The much more burning issue is mercury in vaccines. Now, mercury in various forms have been added to childhood vaccines because it's an adjuvant. An adjuvant is a foreign substance that really, how can I say, really revs up your immune system. So if you want to make a vaccine against a specific virus, say measles or polio or something, and you just inject the virus, you get a pretty medium or mediocre immune response. But if you bind that with mercury, you get a 3, 4, 5 times higher antibody titer. Sorry. So if you think of the American childhood vaccine schedule, I think by the time a person reaches their 35th or 40th year, they have roughly close to 70 different vaccines that they're supposed to take. So if each little vaccine adds a little bit of mercury, you can just imagine what it does to your body. So I've got a huge, big question mark about that sort of recommendation.
Thank you, Martin. I think we need to end the call there. One of the exciting things that we're discussing with our business development manager is the development of a cancer coaching course that will be certified. I know that you are involved in the master's program in integrative medicine in Germany. This would obviously be at a much more basic level and a vocational level involving dietitians and nurses and life coaches. So we look forward to being able to work with you and start a cancer coaching, either a certificate or a diploma, or a certificate leading to a diploma. And I think that all of us are aware of people that have got cancer and who have passed from cancer before their time. And we're seeing very aggressive cancers in young people. And I also thank you for the patients that I've sent to you that you have helped, because my greatest testimonial is not your very extensive bio. It's the fact that when I phone you in a panic, you always answer your phone. So thank you for that, and thank you for what you've done for my patients and for many Zimbabwean patients. And my current prescription for a lot of patients is fly to Windhoek and phone this number. So thank you, Martin, for your dedication and your passion and for everything that you've given to Zimbabwean patients. And with that, I think we should